We decided to write a paper about what deters Russia simply because we've been asked that question so very often. People always want to know, how exactly can you go about dissuading Russia from doing something that's aggressive or even just irresponsible? A lot of the time people think of that in terms of, after Georgia and after Ukraine and Syria, how do we prevent Russia from invading somewhere else? But it's a great deal more than that. There are a whole lot of other patterns of behavior from Russia which it would be better if they didn't happen. Things that present a huge drain on the economies of the frontline states and other countries further afield that have to counter these Russian actions, even before you get into things that cost the lives of innocent civilians in Europe and beyond. An important part of this is understanding the terms of the conversation that's ongoing with Russia and how Russia sees its relationship with the West at the moment. It is not what you might assume as a normal relationship between states if you look at it from a Western perspective, where conversations are calm and orderly and polite. Instead, Russia already sees itself to be in this state of confrontation where things are messy, boundaries are pushed, aggressive behaviors are rewarded, and it does incur casualties. And a basic recognition of that mismatch of expectations between the two sides is absolutely crucially important for understanding how to project those messages both in words and in actions to Russia. Another thing that we argue for strongly is transparency on the part of Western governments. We do recognize, of course, that there are times when the extent of Russian activities against Western countries is not going to be publicly disclosed, because then you also disclose just what capability you have for being aware of it. But it's also critically important that in democracies, it's impossible to defend yourself properly against a threat that most of the population are unaware of. So we think it's vitally important to be more open and more honest about what Russia is doing against Western interests and against Western societies and Western people and their armed forces. All of those, so that the public can be better informed about exactly what is going on and therefore support the kind of defensive measures that would be essential. Now, we have examples of where that's worked extremely well, such as, for example, the response to the attempted murder of Sergei Skripal in 2018, or at roughly the same time, the disclosures of detailed information about Russian cyber activities. All of those allowed Western media and media in Russia and private individuals to actually pull at those threads, chase down those leads, and figure out exactly what was going on. But we've also got examples of the opposite, where a reticence that we don't really understand the reasons for has meant that people are under-informed about what's happening and can't make an informed judgment about it. A classic example is in June 2021, when HMS Defender sails past the coast of Crimea, and the UK MOD thought that it could keep the story under control and release it in a timed fashion and control the narrative, completely overlooking the fact that there were other people involved in delivering this story, like, for example, the journalists that the MOD had actually placed on the ship in the first place. Now, as far as we can tell from the outside, that speaks to an outmoded way of dealing with information and, in some respects, a failure to recognize that how an incident is portrayed and how it's perceived by Western publics is at least as important, if not more so, as what actually happened. That's a key point that Western militaries and Western governments need to grasp in order to successfully have that conversation about deterring Russia.